This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/broedational. I have a podcast called Rehash. I co-host it with my friend Hannah, and it's all about internet phenomena that get us all up in arms, only to forget about them within a week. So we rehash them, as they say. We just concluded our 6th season, which is about internet subcultures, the stories of how they arrived, thrived, and sometimes died. We talk about emos, weebs, Disney adults, and much more. Go check it out. There's this reel circulating on Instagram captioned SATC from Mr. Big's POV that's been getting a lot of play recently. It's a compilation of different out-of-context moments of Carrie Bradshaw showing up at Mr. Big's apartment doing little bits, running into him in public, and reacting emotionally to his disinterest. And the comments are weird. Me now realizing Sex and the City was actually a horror series. LOL, he hated her low-key. Watching this with a fully developed brain, I realize she's the problem. Carrie embarrassing herself throughout the whole show. I'm rewatching at 46, I rewatched in my 30s, I watched it when it first came out when I was 20. It's now so clear to me that Carrie was a box of red flags. And she's such a pick-me in retrospect. It feels like just about every other year now, or whenever Sex and the City makes its way onto a new streaming service, its protagonist, Carrie Bradshaw, is labeled a narcissist, an attention seeker, a villain, and my personal favorite, a pick-me, and then trotted out in front of the cultural firing squad to meet her judgment, with each round of hate more vehement than the last. There's a certain point in Sex and the City where even the most casual viewer will start to turn on Carrie, but these people usually couldn't identify when or why. Less casual viewers like myself, who've had the show on a constant loop for about 6 years now, soak up its lessons like their gospel, and have a Sex and the City reference for just about every occasion in life to the annoyance of everyone around us, know that the turn creeps up in Season 3 and cements itself in Season 4, as Carrie's very characterization begins to change, when she goes from world-weary cool girl to weak, self-obsessed, helpless prude. It's when that turn happens that the public turns on her as well. Of course, somewhere in Season 5, post-affair with Big and reunion with Aiden, the writers attempted to correct her unfavorability with audiences, but the damage had been done, and thus the character became subject to decades of aggressive scrutiny. Late-stage Carrie is certainly different from her earlier counterpart. It's almost as though the character has been fractured by external forces, changing times, a change in writers or their lifestyles, outside influence from the actress who played her. But should we love late-stage, neurotic, self-obsessed, morally dubious Carrie any less than we love the cool girl Carrie of earlier seasons? Is there a world where we can see the virtues in both sides of Carrie and make her whole again? Carrie Bradshaw is my favorite character on television. So it hurts me to think that people so easily and willfully misunderstand her, pathologize her flaws, and use them for brain-dead hot takes like Carrie is the real villain of SATC and Carrie Bradshaw is the ultimate pick-me. So in this video, we're gonna break down just who we think Carrie is and why we love her so damn much, warts and all. It's common knowledge by now that Sex and the City was born of a series of sardonic columns written by Candace Bushnell in the mid-90s for the New York Observer, which were later compiled into a book. At age 18, Bushnell had moved to New York, a college dropout looking for work as an actress, and after much struggle, crashing on friends' couches or piling into tiny boarding houses with other aspiring and failing actresses, she slowly began to develop a career as a writer, reporting on life in New York City for a variety of outlets before landing a consistent gig at The Observer. Around the time her columns were picked up for the book, Bushnell, now in her mid-30s, had reached something of a prime. She was making $1,000 per column and dating Ron Galati, the then corporate vice president at Condé Nast. Bushnell has been described as living in between classes. She was constantly rubbing shoulders with elite New Yorkers like Galati and reveling in their opulent lifestyles, but she was by no means making as much as them. And although Bushnell had boyfriends here and there, her busy work schedule didn't afford much time for long-term romance. Ultimately, she was a single career woman in her mid-30s. This was the general thrust of Bushnell's columns. Pithy vignettes that centered around anonymized friends and acquaintances in Bushnell's life and their thoughts about sex and dating in the city. Bushnell herself is a character in the columns, but there's also the character of Carrie, who functions as a surrogate for Bushnell so that she could talk freely about her sex life without traumatizing her parents. Carrie in the columns is Bushnell's friend who's often recruited to go on research expeditions for her. She's described as 34, some sort of a journalist, and is as cold-blooded and messy as you can get. She's regularly hungover from late drunken nights out, dances topless at bars, jumps ambivalently from man to man, and kind of emotionally terrorizes her one stable boyfriend, Mr. Big, the Galati insert. This passage about her situationship with a 25-year-old named Barkley should tell you all you need to know about her. When Barkley, who described himself as a romantic, inevitably brings a date on a night out with Carrie and her friends, and goes home with said date, Carrie simply runs around with Barkley's best friend Jack. Barkley called her the next afternoon. "What's up, dude?" he said. "I don't know, you called me. I told you I didn't want a girlfriend. You set yourself up. You knew what I was like." "Oh yeah, right," Carrie wanted to say. "I knew you were a shallow two-bit womanizer, and that's why I wanted to go out with you." But she didn't. "I didn't sleep with her. I didn't even kiss her," Barkley said. "I don't care. I'll never see her again if you don't want me to." I really don't give a shit. And the scary thing was, she didn't.
People don't want to get hurt, and they don't want to be involved because it interferes with their work life. You don't want to be at work thinking about some dumb guy who isn't calling you.
I have vomited on my own foot from that kind of, nausea.
So many women in New York, when you get to be over the age of, I think it's 35, you really do start feeling like you're a guy.
Bushnell's friend Sam has a similar attitude. A woman in her early 40s, she is to Bushnell an aspirational figure who's really figured things out. Either you spend all your time dithering about relationships, or you be like Sam and have sex like a man. Bushnell's characters are whip-smart, successful, and quirky, but also calcified by the harsh winds of New York's dating culture. As she puts it, "We were hard and proud of it, and it hadn't been easy to get to this point. This place of complete independence where we had the luxury of treating men like sex objects. It had taken hard work, loneliness, and the realization that, since there might never be anyone there for you, you had to take care of yourself in every sense of the word." Bushnell's book was eventually greenlit as a TV show starring Sarah Jessica Parker, which premiered in 1998 to widespread acclaim. I have another video about Sex and the City, the show, from a few years back, that I think you should check out. One major selling point of Sex and the City was that it had an almost entirely female writing room, all of whom at one point were single, living in New York, and jaded, just like Bushnell's characters. The show demanded long hours from its writers, which made it incredibly hard to sustain a romantic life, but very easy to translate the women's myriad sexual escapades to the small screen. So Carrie in the earlier seasons is a reflection of Bushnell and the show's writers. She's curious and journalistic, cool as ice, world-weary, and shrewd. Her style, a sleek, Carolyn Bessette, late 90s Calvin Klein minimalism, reflects this vibe. And the structure of the show does too, parroting Bushnell's columns by integrating various fourth-wall-breaking interviews from New Yorkers about their thoughts on a given topic. The pilot episode even focuses on a major theme in Bushnell's book: can you have sex like a man? Mr. Big is Carrie's Achilles heel in the first 2 seasons. It's where we see her break that hard edge. But with any other man, she's collected, charming, and capable of knowing just when to cut things off. But the interview segments disappear midway through season 2, and by season 3, the show and Carrie start to morph into something else. This takes shape in All or Nothing, the episode after Carrie and Big begin their affair, where Carrie is haunted by memories of their night together through B-roll footage that's edited much more in the typical sexy Hollywood montage style than the show's usual frank and awkward sex scenes. It's here that the show starts becoming more of a conventional soap opera, like its creator Darren Star's Beverly Hills 90210, than the biting social satire it started out as. Even the music goes from jazzy to poppy. By the time season 4 came around, some very notable parts were moving behind the scenes that could have influenced what I see to be an official turn in the character of Carrie Bradshaw. Prior to season 4, SJP entered new contract negotiations with HBO, where she obtained a producer credit and leveraged her star status to start earning around $3 million per episode, making her the highest paid TV actor of all time, while her co-stars were earning in the low 6 figures, although these numbers are not confirmed. Many people attribute this pay and power discrepancy between SJP and the other women to the reason Kim Cattrall has spoken out publicly against SJP and refused to come back for a third film, as well as the reboot. But people are complicated, relationships are complicated, especially as it pertains to work and friendship. So I'm less interested in this than I am in what SJP's ascent to power meant for her character.
Is this vulgar or is it funny? Is this lewd or is it whimsical and silly and clever and sophisticated? So you worry about things because I've never, ever read anything like this in my life.
Sarah Jessica, especially when we did the pilot, she was like, I never say these words, I never say these words.
SJP has always maintained a carefully curated public image. Unlike Carrie, she was already married when the series began to her now long-term partner Matthew Broderick, and while Carrie is hesitant about having children throughout the show, SJP was pregnant with her son James by the time season 5 had rolled around. Despite being a glamorous, A-list celebrity, she's managed to put forth an image of maternal domesticity that Carrie is averse to. And as SJP gained greater influence over the happenings of the show, her persona slowly began to seep into the character.
We were supposed to have the deluxe first-class sleeper. Wait, you shower over the toilet?
Oh my gosh!
For example, she had an anti-nudity clause in her contract from the outset, which had the character appearing in a bra during intimate scenes where the other women didn't. This sensibility then takes a behavioral turn, with Carrie becoming less and less sexually adventurous as the series progresses. Carrie starts out the series as a smooth operator, a seasoned socialite, but becomes less sure of herself, closer embodying the typical bumbling romantic protagonist of this era. This is most obvious in the way she approaches her career. In earlier seasons, the character feels much more journalistic and more career-oriented, like Bushnell. But over time, she seems hopelessly unaware of the publishing world, at times even incompetent, like not understanding what her publishers mean when they ask her about the tone of her book, or forgetting a pen when she goes to Vogue, and being confused when they come back at her with edits. Like, aren't you a writer? SJP's also said that she was unhappy with the way Carrie looked in the pilot episode, and so over time the character becomes blonder, more feminine, wears louder colors. The bleeding of SJP's bubbly, girlish persona into Carrie can definitely explain these changes, but there's some things that are harder to explain. Carrie makes poor choices in season 3, with the whole cheating on Aiden with a married big and all. But like I said, people are complicated. Where her character really takes a nosedive towards the unforgivable is season 4. In a 2021 article for Vox, Alex Abad-Santos accuses Carrie of having main character syndrome, and points to an episode late in season 4 when Carrie demands that Charlotte offer to give her money to buy her apartment back from Aiden, as the moment when Carrie turned from pluck, charming rom-com heroine to raging narcissist. But Carrie's point of no return happens well before that. Beginning in episode 4 of season 4, she starts to expect servility from her friends, like when she's having a breakdown about being in a fashion show and barks at Stanford to fetch Samantha for her, despite his discomfort with the social situation back in the audience. As the seasons go on, her friends seem to orbit around her and accommodate her frivolity more so than other seasons.
This is frustrating. I can't follow your thoughts.
And then comes a sequence of episodes that I have trouble wrapping my head around. These are the episodes where Carrie and Aiden faithfully renew their relationship. She sees Aiden at the opening of his bar and decides that she still loves him, although we've seldom seen her talk about him at all since their breakup.
I'm just afraid the way I treated him is gonna haunt me the rest of my life.
In the next episode, she ignores Miranda's warning that Aiden might not want to get back together with her and attempts it anyway. When Aiden pushes back and tells her she broke his heart, she runs away crying as if she's the victim here. In the next episode, they're back together, and when Aiden asserts a very understandable boundary that he doesn't want her to see Big anymore, the man she cheated on him with, she tells him this is a non-negotiable and demands that he forgive her for her past behavior. Without any buffers, in the episode immediately following, Carrie is berating Aiden for trying to help her fix her computer, and sensing that they're getting closer, tries to push him away. And then the episode right after that, she has a tantrum about having to hang out at his rustic cabin upstate, and then right after that, Carrie invites a heartbroken Big up to the cabin despite Aiden's obvious discomfort and begs them to get along. We get some respite from Carrie's poor behavior for a couple episodes before she and Aiden break up, but with such an unrelenting sequence of events, it's difficult to imagine what the writer's objective was in writing Carrie this way, other than to shake off what little fans she had left following the affair. Perhaps it was that the writer's lack of romantic lives, which worked so well for earlier seasons, became a hindrance when the characters needed to grow and enter long-term relationships, Maybe it's that classic TV dilemma of arbitrarily sabotaging romantic relationships to get characters to where they need to be by the end of a show's run, or perhaps they were just comfortable allowing their hero to be undeniably bad. The more I watch the show, the more palpable it is that seasons 5 and 6 are redemption projects for Carrie. The writers humble her just about every chance they get. We see her walking around confidently before getting caught in the rain, getting rejected by a stranger, hurting her back during a bout of particularly bad sex, and being forced to attend Charlotte's wedding with a hunchback. There's also the burger storyline, where Carrie dates an insecure, evasive, petty man who's envious of her newfound success with her book. You see the tables flipped on Carrie as she desperately tries to temper her volatile lover and mend their relationship in a mature manner, only to be dumped with a post-it note. This manifests again when she dates Alexander Petrovsky, who is moody, self-interested, and, importantly, does not get along with Carrie's friends. Petrovsky calls all the shots in their relationship, and because he and Carrie have so little in common outside of each other, you see the things we do love about her quirkiness, her effervescence, start to fade in his light. I think these last 2 seasons are effective at helping us forget some of Carrie's wrongdoings, so that by the end of the show, you're rooting for her. And having seen her lose agency in her final 2 relationships, you also find yourself rooting for Mr. Big as well. But during these seasons, the character at her core feels unrecognizable. By the finale, she's no longer the scrappy, smooth-talking, curly Carrie that once asked the new Yankee on a date, but helpless, socially awkward, and adorned in ridiculous, frilly designer gowns, the likes of which Miranda would once have openly scorned. So there are 2 different Carries. The shrewd, calcified, cool girl Carrie of seasons 1 through 3, and the uneasy, whiny, hopeless romantic SJP Carrie of seasons 4 onward. But taking a step back and giving her a good look, we must ask, who is Carrie as a whole? And can we forgive her? The main charge against Carrie is that she's selfish. But I don't think selfishness is necessarily her problem. People are often miffed that Carrie's perceived selfishness rears its head in her friendships, that she is not there for her friends as much as they are for her. This critique is in bad faith. There are many instances of Carrie showing up for her friends. When Miranda's mother passes away and she organizes for the girls to attend the funeral, sparing her friend from having to walk behind the coffin alone. When she stands up for a newly divorced Charlotte after a motivational speaker tells her she isn't trying hard enough to find love, and later dedicating her book to Charlotte, or when she gives Charlotte a pep talk before her wedding to Trey, and another when she marries Harry, or when she goes to prom with Stanford when he and Marcus are going through a hard time. When it comes to Samantha, well, she rarely puts herself in a position vulnerable enough to require support from her friends. But when she's forced into this position by way of sickness, like coming down with a flu or being diagnosed with cancer, Carrie rallies around her.
Let me talk about what I'm afraid of, please.
Is Carrie a perfect friend? No, but none of the women are. Charlotte is judgmental, especially of Samantha, and often inadvertently bashes the other women for still being single.
I can't wait. I'm the oldest woman I know who doesn't have a baby.
Miranda is judgmental and very harsh, refusing to offer Charlotte even a margin of support when she wavers about giving up her career. And yes, even your beloved Samantha can fall short, like when she treats Miranda's new maternal status like a burden and neglects to help out until asked to by Carrie, or when she crosses a clear boundary by sleeping with Charlotte's brother, and is then defensive when Charlotte is, I think, fairly upset about it. Carrie has moments of falling short just like the rest of them. They're all selfish to some degree or another. They're hard-edged metropolitan career women. I mean, a guy literally dies right before Miranda's supposed to go on a date with him, and she somehow manages to make it about herself.
They're starting to die on us.
Oh my God.
Well, at least you weren't stood up.
Carrie's problem, which differentiates her from the others, is more so a lack of self-respect, or a misplaced self-respect. Joan Didion once wrote, "People with self-respect have the courage of their mistakes. They know the price of things. If they choose to commit adultery, they do not then go running in an access of bad conscience to receive absolution from the wronged parties, nor do they complain unduly of the unfairness, the undeserved embarrassment of being named co-respondent. In brief, people with self-respect exhibit a certain toughness, a kind of moral nerve. They display what was once called character, a quality which, although approved in the abstract, sometimes loses ground to other, more instantly negotiable virtues. Nevertheless, character, the willingness to accept responsibility for one's own life, is the source from which self-respect springs.
I think that I may be the voice of my generation, or at least a voice of a generation.
Carrie's perceived selfishness is often compared to that of Hannah Horvath in Girls, but the key difference between them is that Hannah knows how self-absorbed she is, knows that it's a necessary ingredient to being a memoirist. She has to think about herself constantly in order to narrativize her life. Hannah knows the price of things. Carrie, on the other hand, does not. She's completely unaware of herself and how her actions may affect others. Frequently throughout the show, Carrie does not demonstrate the courage of her mistakes, instead ceding to them and thus absorbing them into her being. For Didion, self-respect requires a private reconciliation with oneself, the ability to accept your mistakes and move on from them, rather than falling into a well of shame. But because she lacks self-respect, Carrie is motivated by shame. Carrie and Samantha are not so different in their actions. Samantha routinely sleeps with married men, but the reason we as an audience are more able to look past it, beyond her character being more cartoonish, is that Samantha has no shame about her choices and thus possesses self-respect. Carrie, on the other hand, attempts to receive absolution, as evidenced when she commits the very act that Didion denounces and crashes Big's ex-wife Natasha's lunch to beg for forgiveness. And she does the same with Aiden. As Didion writes, one shuffles flashily but in vain through one's marked cards the kindness done for the wrong reason, the apparent triumph which involved no real effort, the seemingly heroic act into which one had been shamed. When people set out to defend Carrie, they often liken her to Don Draper and Tony Soprano, other TV anti-heroes who do much, much worse on screen than Carrie does for a margin of the flag. I think this comparison works when we're talking about the disproportionate gendered backlash against Carrie, but when it comes to her role as a protagonist, I'd say she's a lot closer to a Woody Allen type. That is, a bona fide neurotic. There's not much mystery to a Woody Allen protagonist, mainly because he cracked them open for us by overlaying his films with verbose narration, where his characters fret over the minutiae of everyday interactions and romantic dynamics. They're not exactly aspirational figures, but rather idiosyncratic everymen, externalizing the things that regular people worry about by speaking it directly to us. The same can be said for Carrie. The show is formatted through the journalistic voice of her columns, as Carrie narrates the goings-on of her friends' lives, but also contemplates how these situations affect a larger picture of the New York dating scene. Hearing her thoughts creates a sense of intimacy between us and Carrie, which endears us to her, whichever part of her we're getting at a given time. Neuroticism makes Carrie's identity an elastic one, because her hypersensitivity to social interactions changes her persona depending on the person she's with. She often mirrors the men she dates and becomes their opposite. With Big, she's anxious, where he's avoidant. With Aiden, she's avoidant and temperamental, where he is calm and warm. With Berger, she is stable and affectionate, where he is insecure and volatile. With Petrovsky, she is a helpless American child, where he is mature, Russian, and self-assured. Her identity is constantly in flux as we watch her shapeshift through these relationships and turn inwards to her neuroses, as we all do to some extent. And Carrie's shame-driven neuroses cause her to self-sabotage. Like, the reason she crashes Natasha's lunch is not because she feels the moral weight of destroying Natasha's marriage, but is instead tortured by the thought that she's gonna have bad karma for the rest of her life if she doesn't make things right. She spends an entire episode fretting about a weird look one of Aiden's ex-girlfriends gives her in a bathroom, which leads to an uncomfortable situation of her own making. In the first season, she goes to lengths to get a meeting with Big's publisher ex-wife so Carrie can measure herself up against her, and then Big finds out. The self-sabotage is always at its worst when it's with Big. His disinterested attitude and inability to commit leads Carrie to fret about tiny, perceived misdemeanors and then implode. Cool as Ice Carrie of the books is even worse. Take this passage. She decides she has to torture Mr. Big again. "Do you think we're close?" she asks just before they're going to sleep. "Sometimes," Mr. Big says. "Sometimes isn't enough for me," she says. She continues to bug him until he begs her to let him go to sleep. But when she wakes up early the next morning, the bug is still there. But at times, Carrie's neuroses make her quite sympathetic, because they put her on a path so far off from what she really wants or needs. Many episodes have Carrie obsessing over whether or not her choices are actually failures, wondering if she's pregnant in the baby shower episode, feeling shamed for being frivolous in the shoes episode, feeling embittered in the Atlantic City episode and the self-help seminar episode, feeling incompetent and inexperienced in the learning annex episode. Carrie has trouble hitting the milestones life is expected of her, but unlike Samantha, it's not because she doesn't want them. She wants them, but seems to get stuck on them in one way or another. Like the physical reaction she has to the idea of marrying Aiden, which she's unable to explain. Or in one particularly heartbreaking episode in the final season, when Petrovsky asks her if she's ever thought of having kids, she says she hasn't gotten around to it, and he says this.
And when were you planning to do this? How old are you? 38?
You feel the blow along with Carrie, but you also find yourself wondering why she hasn't given it a more serious thought, if it's something she's open to. Carrie cannot be obsessive in the way Woody Allen's characters are. Mid-40s, dating 18-year-olds, and bothered only by the most minor of social infractions. Carrie is bothered by these infractions too, but women are not socially privileged by time the way men are. And so in these moments when Carrie's neuroticism crashes into reality, you can't help but feel badly for her. At least, I can't.
I'm lonely. I am. The loneliness is palpable.
Like New York is to Woody Allen and other neurotics, the city is something of a lover to Carrie Bradshaw. It's something she turns to especially as a comfort during painful breakups. New York is a character in this show.
You can't leave New York. You're the Chrysler Building.
And Carrie is highly impacted by its surrounding environment. This makes Carrie something of a flâneur, or flâneuse, that 19th century conception of an anonymous, bourgeois, urban wanderer, usually male, who walks the streets and makes observations about his surroundings without joining in on the action. Carrie is a wanderer of New York, extrapolating from it in her sometimes incisive, sometimes obsessive way. But she's also a woman. In her survey of the flâneuse in popular culture, Amy Murphy discusses the way that bourgeois women were excluded from the act of wandering. She says that one of the most resilient tropes found in urban literature, dating from the early 19th century to the present, is the notion that the female body disrupts the order of the male-controlled city. And unfortunately, in many ways, that is still true today. Sex and the City and its progenitive columns are about how hostile the urban environment can be for a woman who is middle-aged or nearing middle age and has the audacity to be unwed and childless.
Remember that feeling like if you left Manhattan even for a second, you'd fall off the edge of the earth?
Oh. God, don't remind me.
Whether it's Miranda feeling invisible at a wedding, or Samantha being treated as a threat by married women at parties, or Charlotte feeling touchy about having to dance alone in a tap class, a main thesis of the show is that the mere existence of an unwed, childless woman is transgressive.
I had just experienced single bashing for the new millennium. I was no longer even considered a person. I was now an egg farm.
I think the cigarette conveys this well. It's a multi-purpose device in the show, used most frequently as a symbol for Carrie's flaws.
Cigarettes? Gone. Seriously, all bad habits gone.
But it's also used to signal that Carrie, a single woman, is somewhere that she is not welcome.
Can I smoke in here? Is that all right?
No! Carrie's very public aloneness is a transgression. I don't think people appreciate the importance of that episode, They Shoot Single People, Don't They?, wherein Carrie opts to not have sex with a handsome man in order to feel secure, but instead sits on a patio the next day, completely alone. Even in her lowest moments, she takes command of her situation by wandering around the city by herself. And we see how much she's exacted this skill in New York when she goes to Paris in the finale and attempts to flâneuse, but feels empty, lost, and unwanted. Sometimes I think Carrie's whininess is a form of deviancy. Maybe her refusal to marry the perfect guy, opting to be a bad woman and destroy a marriage, to be weak and clingy to an emotionally unavailable man, is ultimately transgressive in itself. At the very least, it's provocative, because it's led to decades of people sniffing out these very human qualities in this character, getting startled by their reflection, and attempting to distance themselves from her. Of the Sex and the City film, Hilary Radner writes, "The film promotes the fantasy, through these endless do-overs, that girlishness as the sign of perpetual adolescence, with its promise of change and development, and its rejection of stasis and fixity as the fate of the mature woman, offers a desirable and attainable identity, biological age notwithstanding, to the predominantly over 25 female audience." Carrie does become more infantile and girlish in the later seasons, as we see her lean on her friends more and more for support. This culminates in a moment in the first Sex and the City movie, the only movie that exists in my mind, where Carrie recently stood up at the altar and now lying despondent in her honeymoon bed surrounded by her friends, is literally spoon-fed her breakfast by Samantha. When I first saw this, I was repulsed. I thought, this is a grown woman. But my feelings about Sex and the City are constantly evolving as I get older and closer in age to Carrie and her friends. And with this, I've come to feel more tenderly towards Carrie, especially in those later seasons and the movie. I've been thinking a lot recently about how we really do oscillate between baby and parent in romantic relationships, regardless of the fact that we're adults. In pursuit of companionship, we take turns nurturing and being nurtured. But when you're single, who will do this? Who will even so much as give you a hug?
I need to feel the weight of a man on me.
In these later seasons, Carrie is the only one of her friends who is not in a stable relationship, who has not moved on.
I cannot stay in New York and be single for you.
So her friends take on the role of nurturer that a partner would otherwise. Now, I find that scene really beautiful. There's a line spoken by Amelita Amalfi, a character who shows up for only one episode in season 1, but plays a much bigger part in the book, which echoes this idea. Amelita is described as an international party girl who seems to have mastered the art of using her womanly wiles to secure an opulent lifestyle. But in this moment, she gives Carrie some unexpected advice. "When I really needed help, Sweet Pea, there were no men around. I was alone, except for a few of my good girlfriends." By the end of the book, though, Amelita's tune changes. Big and Carrie have yet another massive fight, with Carrie telling Big that their relationship is just the same as all the others she's had, even though he's now admitted that he loves her and wants to commit. She then goes to Amelita, who, after being ghosted by yet another rich businessman, has started renting a cheap flat with her daughter on the Upper East Side. Carrie buys her a slice of pizza, and Amelita says, "I know you're thinking about leaving Mr. Big. Don't. Hold on to him. Of course you're beautiful and you should have a million guys calling you up wanting to be with you. But you and I, we know the truth. We know something about real life, don't we?" Of course, this could be read as a plea for Carrie to open herself up to love. And it is. But it's also got a pretty cynical undertone, doesn't it? That relationships with men, even the loving ones, are transactional. That is the truth that both of these world-weary women know. Choose Big and you'll have security. Choose to be alone and you'll end up like Amelita. Carrie chooses Big. Is this so different from that self-protection and closing the deal, Cupid has flown the co-op mantra that the book espouses about modern dating at the beginning? Many people say that Carrie of the show does not grow as a person. And yes, the writers spent ages disagreeing about how the show should end. So Big's arrival in Paris can feel like a bit of a big ex machina. But I do think the ending symbolizes growth for Carrie. Book Carrie makes less mistakes than her TV counterpart, as does Big, and they manage to make their relationship work. But outside of Big telling her "I love you" more and Carrie warming up to him, she doesn't evolve as much as Carrie in the show, given that cynical ending. Whereas, like I said in my Sex and the City video, TV Carrie becomes less cynical as the show progresses. Through a series of humblings and heartbreaks, yes, especially the one with Aiden, she begins to soften and actually becomes more sure of what she wants out of a relationship. She even tells us point blank,
I am someone who is looking for love. Ridiculous, inconvenient, can't live without each other love.
This is when she gets together with Big once and for all. Carrie becomes whinier and less cool, but I'd argue less neurotic as well. Intuiting things about her world, simply cutting Big loose when he stonewalls her a final time, intuiting that her life in New York is a bit stagnant. And it's these internal revelations to me that are more important, because she's able to go back to New York and back into a relationship with her great man, a more realized, more embodied, less jaded person, who is more capable of being in a long-term relationship than she was in season 1. I see the show as a rebuttal to the generally bleak and nihilistic, but perhaps cooler worldview of the book. As I stare down the barrel of my late 20s and scramble to piece together a life I think society wants of me, I now understand how brave it is for a woman to be in her late 30s and boldly still be wanting spontaneity, a child, a great inconvenient love. To me, this makes Carrie a true hero. The show tells us to keep making mistakes, to embrace pain where it comes, and to do all this when society would rather you were shut away in the private sphere, silent and useless to the world now that life's milestones have been knocked off one by one. Like the neurotic New York protagonist before her, Carrie wanders about the streets and makes observations about what she sees, internalizes it, and turns it into art, the art of her own life. We view her as selfish because her behavior, frivolous, self-serving, and trafficking of public spaces, is like a man. But her heroism comes from doing all this, and still carrying the burden of doubt and the shadow of shame that weighs upon any heterosexual woman who enters her 30s alone. Part of the venom towards Carrie comes from the writer's unwillingness to relieve us of her messiness. But part of it is that Carrie, in her schism, begins to embody an unchill, middle-aged woman, which is something we as a society hate. In a journal article about Sex and the City, Lorraine DiCicco asks her readers, what story can one tell about the grotesque figure of the aging single woman? Her freak show is decidedly over. But Sex and the City proved that it isn't. And while the show has aged, this much is still true. Because clearly, we're still bothered. This video is sponsored by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. It's for lovers of great cinema and those who don't know they love great cinema yet. Because the beauty of Mubi is that it exposes you to artful, thought-provoking, and innovative films you would never think to watch. Recently released is a gritty thriller called Bring Them Down by Christopher Andrews. It stars Christopher Abbott and Barry Keoghan as the sons of warring farming families in rural Ireland who have been severed by an accident that happened decades before. I think of Bring Them Down as a modern revenge tragedy, as its characters' stubborn misperceptions of each other set into motion a devastating spiral of senseless mutual destruction. Andrews uses his mastery of storytelling to challenge our empathy for these characters, never letting us settle on an answer as to whether or not their hatred is warranted. Bring Them Down is a compelling contribution to Irish national cinema, and you can find it streaming almost globally right now on Mubi. Discover the best of cinema at your fingertips, streaming anytime, anywhere. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/broedeschanel. That's mubi.com/broedeschanel for a whole month of great cinema for free. Special thank you to Syed Hassan, Mal Pertwee, Morgan, Cooper Stimson, Nadia C., Nick, Jenny Eller, J. Frost McFinnigan, Gabriel M., The Wiz Daniel, Edward Yu, Andrew Nguyen, Carolyn Stowe, Connor O'Keefe, Gavin Borden, Sharma, Smith, Daniel Sardunas, Jenya, Ryan Blythe, Lotaire Roulan, Maya Kamaeva, Naomi Nakagawa, Burrow Fiddle, Scott Barnett, Julia Campana, Mr. Allen, Luis Eduardo Taroba, Alexis, Nafis Bullock, Carrie Gavin, RSS, Fridtjof Holstrom, Alex Short, and Kelly Wolf for supporting this channel.